John Joe, good afternoon.
Jeff, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
My pleasure. Welcome to the Medium Podcast. How's the week been treating you?
Yeah, good. Yeah, good, Jeff. Yeah, fairly typical, I would say.
Yep.
Yeah, quite a lot of activity going on. Yeah, it's been quite packed full. I suppose what's happening, I think we've all got our eye on the macro economic conditions to see what might be around the corner.
Yeah.
In my industry, but yeah, fairly typical, I would say, in terms
Very
of what we do
typical,
day
eh?
to day. But yeah, pretty good.
I think you had a podcast that was coming or before where you brought on a guest, I believe, who worked in the markets, who wanted to share how the macro environment could potentially affect the sort of the hiring recruitment space. Is that correct? Or
That's right. So I did have a conversation similar to this morning, Jeff, with a lady, Raquel, from a VC firm. And that's right. So as I mentioned, there's a little bit of caution across a lot of my customers and their partners and people I speak with on the day to day in terms of supporting them with hiring and employment opportunities. So then we're trying to get a finger on the pulse as to what the impacts might have here locally. We're starting to see some anecdotal impacts of it. So as always, just trying to get ahead of it and see if we can understand what might happen. That sounds a little bit perhaps doom and gloom. I don't think that is the case, but trying to find out some information from people and a business that are very much at the forefront of those macro evolving economics, because they're a private equity firm. So yeah, had a good conversation this morning.
lovely, lovely. And from this sort of anecdotal evidence in terms of what potentially could be, I know you've been in the recruitment space for some time. You've probably seen the cycles. What's your sort of take on it? I'm just sort of curious.
Perhaps lucky enough to be young enough that I didn't experience the GFC, so I wasn't even in work at that time. I think I was still studying. So besides the COVID pandemic, haven't seen the corrections that do occur. You hear a lot of stories about what those markets can look like. So I wouldn't actually have any experience of it, to be honest, but we do know that recruitment hiring is one of the first things that could be paused, affected as a result of more cautious business planning, perhaps. So we'll see what happens. But it's not something I'd have any direct experience in so far.
What's interesting is that you've raised an interesting sort of topic in your responses about sort of self-reflection in yourself. And what's interesting is that it seems that a lot of organizations now are going through their own sort of self-reflection stage.
I agree. Yeah, employee experience is perhaps the caveat that is used. It's something that's become a lot more prominent from businesses in the way that they operate now. It's perhaps was in times past, it was less of a business critical concern, but it's certainly now something that's spokenly more openly about, particularly because of the inability to access talent and keep staff. So employee experience is big, and I think what businesses are trying to do, and I think it's also a result, perhaps we'll talk through this, I think it's also a result of the general population, if you might call that, having a little bit more of an urge or a need to find meaning through work. That's been perhaps a common transition of the workplace in recent years. So I think people, particularly with the pandemic environment as well, people have reassessed and corrected the way they approach work and life, I think. And as such, they're looking to find meaning through their work, or find work practices or employment in which they can pursue their own meaning, and they're able to do that with a workplace that supports them to do that. So I think that's something that's becoming a lot more prominent in with my generation, whether it's a generational thing or whether it's a sign of the times, but I think that's become a lot more prominent.
Interesting. Do you think it's generational, or do you think it's sort of been prompted by COVID, where when you think about it, right, COVID has affected people in an unequal way?
I think it's perhaps both.
Mm,
It's you're right. It's absolutely affected people in different ways. So it's not been an equal spread. From a generational perspective, I think it's certainly pertinent in that the perhaps we don't want to get into specific generations and be restrictive in that way, but it's fairly clear that the route to pursuing work and fulfillment was different to perhaps our parents' era and what they expected to gain through that progression versus people that come into workforce now. I think that's completely different in what they would expect from a career versus 30 or 40 years ago.
And obviously yourself, John Joe, if we were to rewind back probably, perhaps same time last year when you and I chatting, I was in an organization, you were coming to me about potentially working from a partnership. And here you are, you're now running your own sort of recruitment house. You moved away from being an employee, so to speak. Are you very much part of that sort of generation and that sort of candidate where you are yourself looking to find more meaning too?
It's a good question. I would say yes. I've been very fortunate that the decision to go out by myself and run my own business has been a great opportunity from a commercial aspect, from a growth in business, growth in career perspective. They've all been things that I've been able to access. I've been very lucky on that point. The second point is I've been able to access greater work-life balance, more time with my young family, and more time to do some, perhaps what would you call it without being trite, some self-development work. I've been able to access that as well, and whether that's because of the post-pandemic era, I'm not sure. So I've been able to do both, which is quite unique, I think. But if I hadn't have done this, I think I'd still be in a position where I'd be looking to access a greater work-life balance or greater meaning in some way, whether it is through work or other. I think that's something that'd be a key part of my decision making if I was to go and work for somebody else, I would say.
Did COVID prompt you, John Joe, or was it more something that it was always in you and you were just trying to maybe find an opportunity to branch out? Or
I would say it was always in me. I wouldn't say I was necessarily an entrepreneur. Perhaps there are much more entrepreneurial people out there than me with great ideas, but the idea of challenging myself has been pretty inherent, and starting something myself was perhaps the most logical next step in the industry I was in. So I think from a young age, I was quite conscious that I would like to do that. I've come from a family that have been mostly self-employed not in this industry, mostly blue collar trade industries. So it's been something that I've grown up with, and I think I always wanted to do. So yeah, it was probably going to happen at some point, but COVID may have pushed it in that direction.
And you mentioned sort of self-development growth. Are you working towards something in particular that prompts you to grow, or is it very much something that's built into you where, as an individual, if you don't grow, you might as well be stale? I'm sure you're not too heard of that sort of phrase where it's actually not okay to sit still, like you have to grow, right? So I'm curious to see from your end, John Joe, what's the motivation behind you growing?
I agree. Yeah, I think that's certainly something that's been a big part of my personality. So just an appetite for growth. The reason why I did this was a real thought about if you're not challenging yourself, you don't feel uncomfortable, you don't, and that's proven by neurology to an extent. If you're not, I did it anecdotally, but it's proven that if you don't challenge yourself to a point beyond your own confidence, you don't get the maximum effect of development and learning as a result of that. So what you just said anecdotally is in fact proven from a scientific perspective. So yeah, it's certainly been a need to grow, and the word growth will continue to change probably year to year for me. Growth, what it means to me now is different to what it meant 5 years ago. So that perhaps you might say, innate desire for growth is good and bad. It's a bit of a dichotomy, really, because I'm constantly looking for growth, and that call it monkey brain or survival part of our evolution means that I'm typically on all the time, and that survival mode has meant that I've had relative success in professional sport and then the corporate sector as well. So I'm always looking for that. The downside of that is having that, which is over enhanced, means that you are on all the time and you are in survival mode. So without good proper checks and balances in place, that can lead to anxiety quite quickly, because there's a real need for control, to control the uncontrollable, and that desire to control things has meant that I've typically outworked probably outworked, and that's why I've had relevant success. That need to control has meant that I've probably worked in a certain way, which has brought certain things, but the flip side of it is it can be potentially damaging, not to me, but it could be potentially damaging if you're purely operating in survival mode every day, all day.
Have you now got the checks and balances in place to prompt you when you do find yourself being on for too long?
It's a work in progress, but I feel I'm starting to discover tools that allow me to get that, for sure. But it's certainly a work in progress.
It's tough, actually.
I think being aware of it is perhaps a good first step.
And what happens if I put you in a situation where, here's a question for you, right? You really got me thinking, right? Would you want to be in a situation where you're off?
I think I would. However, we find ourselves in the world that we're in and the structures that we know, which are as they are, they're pretty objective. We perhaps don't need to give an opinion on them.
That's true. Very good point.
But they are as they are. So in order to thrive and survive, with using a trite phrase again, you kind of need to be, I think to step into that world and again survive. I think you need to be, to an extent, you
need to play that game, isn't it? You
need to play that game. That's right.
We do.
To the level that you decide to invest in it versus the outcomes you can gain from it is perhaps up to you. But yeah, in an ideal world, you could be off, but you perhaps need to step in and beyond. So the where I'm at right now could change in a few years, is perhaps a philosophy on stepping into the game, playing as best I can during that time. And then when I don't need to be in the game, giving myself an opportunity to be off. I think that's the analogy we're using, but be more open to whatever it might be and not controlling the uncontrollables and just experiencing. Being present is probably a big thing that I'm probably trying to achieve, which again, in survival mode, you're perhaps not thinking about being present.
You mentioned tools that you're currently being using. What kind of tools are there? I'm curious. I would love to learn from you.
Meditation is a big one. Yeah, so that's something I've incorporated probably a few years ago. It's been good for me. I know it can be difficult for a lot of people, and I found it quite difficult until I've found upon a particular method that works for me, and it still works. I do it twice a day, and that allows me to just put the brakes on that survival mode to an extent and become a little bit more present. So that's something I do twice a day religiously. And then other reading, basically, and exploration. So I just read a lot and try to understand other people's perspectives, because what we're talking about now isn't a new concept. It's
nothing's new.
Centuries that people have been trying to perhaps get to the bottom of what we're talking about. So just trying to understand different perspectives on how other people gain, what we're trying to, perhaps what we're talking about is enlightenment, I'd say. So how have others tried to get, that's right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. How do we get there?
And with this, with this meditation, is it simply going, okay, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to go into an office, a spare office in WeWork, for example. I'm going to lock the door. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to turn off notifications. Do not disturb. And do you listen to your breath? Do you focus on something? How do you do it? I'm curious because I've always tried it, right? And I'll share what my meditation is, but I'll be curious to see how you approach it.
I started off with breath and observation. So I think, there's some modern really popular apps which are really great at that. Didn't really work for me in a way that I was hoping to. So I studied transcendental meditation, did a course, and that was pretty mind-blowing. I would say it was like no meditation I'd ever done before. Wow. The reason, and the exact mechanics, but I believe the result of it is that you tire your mind to an extent in which the survival mind switches off and you become completely present. So the research which they've done, I think it's actually used in healthcare in Canada, I believe, but the research they've done is that it can be as restful as 3 times deep sleep once you're in that state. So it enables you to be completely shut off and be completely relaxed for that period of time. So I do that for 20 minutes twice a day.
How do you get into it? But like one of the challenges I found with meditation, right, is like for me now, I'll tell you a technique that I use, right? But how do you get into that? But like you made a very good point about putting yourself in a state where you turn off the survival mode, right? But can you really go, you know what, it's 11 o'clock, turn it off, give me that 20 minutes and you do it? Or
I have to time it at a certain point. So if I know I've got a lot of things that I need to follow up on, and I can tell inside me I need to go do that, I wouldn't be able to invest in it as well as I'd like to. So I do it as soon as I wake up in the morning before I've touched my phone, looked at any emails. So I do it then, and then I do it just after lunch, where I give myself a 30-minute slot. So if you time it well enough so that you're not engaged in an activity that you have to come away from, I find that I can get a little bit deeper, and the actual practice in itself perhaps accommodates for that. So it's essentially a word or mantra that you say over and over until your brain becomes so tired, I suppose simplistically, that it stops thinking, but that part of the brain at least rests for some time. And
it's been very effective for you, yeah?
I've found so. Yeah, it's something that I've done every day for the past 3 years. So
wow, that's discipline.
Well, perhaps not. I think if it was difficult, but I wasn't getting anything back from it, I perhaps wouldn't have been able to keep it up. But I think such is testament to the improvements I've had. If I don't do it now during the day, I can tell I'll be really tense. I'll start to feel a little bit of a headache creeping in. I can physically feel it in my shoulders if I haven't done it on that day.
And would you say that it helps you combat, for example, a difficult customer or a difficult candidate? It helps you bring you back in a way, or?
I don't know if I use it as point and shoot as that. I'd perhaps use a breathing technique for some of that, which is a little bit more available and ready. So I might do a deep breath exhalation. So two short deep breaths in and then a long deep exhalation. I might use that a bit more readiness, but same as anybody, you can easily be knocked off being in a state of Zen by an external thing. So I certainly don't profess to be able to keep Zen throughout the day, but I don't think
anyone can.
Not in the corporate world for sure. But I do try to give myself at least those 2 blocks to give it a good go. But tell me about your meditation.
I think I read a lot, right? You mentioned it yourself, you do a lot of reading. And I found And I found something as simple as, have you watched the movie Kung Fu Panda?
No.
So obviously, naturally, one of the main characters is a panda, right? Now, do watch out. You know, when you have a bit of time, you mentioned young family, you know, or you yourself when you get a bit of downtime. Well, watch Kung Fu Panda, right? And essentially, the old grand Kung Fu master goes to the panda one day. He goes, "Tomorrow is a mystery. Yesterday is history. Today is a gift. That's why we call it the present."
It's good.
It's good, eh?
It's poignant for a Disney
turtle
movie, isn't it?
It is,
Yeah,
eh?
that's
And
right.
I suppose I've been doing this for such a long time, right? That, and like what you said, right? You couldn't be doing your meditation for 3 years, twice a day, if you didn't think it was working, right? Now, for me right now, I force myself to live into the present. And is it a tool or is it a mindset? And it's very much a mindset thing, John Joe, about I really try to plant myself in the current day. Like what you said, right? Given the environment that we're in, and whether you're in corporate or whether you run your own business or whatever, right? There's always something that goes wrong, right? So over the years, I just trained a mind, you could say, to just force myself to go, you know what? Actually, in the past, I would get a lot of grief and I would get a lot of pain, always thinking about what's next. Now, you mentioned earlier in our conversation about how when you're in that growth mindset, it's hard to turn off. And I realized when I just kept doing that, right, I was always delaying the enjoyment of the day.
Gratification.
And I paid the price for it, right? And what's the greatest lesson? The greatest lesson is that you need to do it yourself, get burnt before you realize that. So thankfully, that happened to me many times. And that prompted me to go, you know what? You really got to plonk yourself in the present day. Whatever happened 2 minutes ago is whatever happened 2 minutes ago. It's gone. It's just here to focus now. So it's very much this conversation between you and I. I'm here for you. You're my focus. And that's what I've been doing. And you probably, and I'm not too sure, you probably heard my son and daughter crying in the background. It is school holidays. Yeah, so I think it's very much a mindset thing. Yeah.
It's interesting to talk about how do you get there, because the beauty of the journey that people find themselves in, which is, you know, conventional material drive to, you know, the self-help industry really promotes this as to, if I can only just get here, then I'll be happy. And that really works. It really works if you don't achieve it, and it continues and continues, and people spend their lives. But my appreciation is, when you do get there, you realize that nothing changes. So I think to have that, I won't say enlightenment, so I'm nowhere near that, but to have that, to either think ahead and realize that you won't achieve enlightenment or happiness by reaching a certain personal goal. Do you get there by getting to that goal and realizing, or do you perceive that ahead of time? And it sounds like you know, either you've got there and realized it didn't bring you anything else, or you perceived it already. What would you say?
Yeah. You know what's interesting about we talk about podcasts, we talk about, you know, can you control everything, right? Now here's a perfect example of me trying to control the situation. This is my son, by the way. He has made his first appearance on the show, but you know what? I'm just going to let it be.
No.
But you're right, and something like this is a good example of how you can plan anything, right? You can make it perfect, you know, and that brought me a lot of grief of trying to control the situation. But then I realized I'll just let it be.
The other part of it is to it goes back to your question about finding meaning, and when you say let it be and take out the uncontrollables, how you get there, it's either spiritual or through another way. I'm atheist by choice, and I would say I'm more of a, I suppose I need some kind of proof to believe in things, which is perhaps a detriment as well, a downfall. But I've managed to get there through the panda analogy you made. I've managed to get there through more of a scientific approach, which was basically what you said, which was, have you ever experienced a future that was more than a thought happening right now? No. Have you ever experienced a past other than it being a thought right now? And that has allowed me to get a little bit towards where you are in terms of not thinking about the past and the present, past and the future, and being completely present. But it's sounds like you've got it, on tap, but it is so hard. I think it's something that you constantly have to keep checking back in to the present.
It's like what we talked about, could you go for a day where you can not blow up, you're so calm. It's very difficult to be in that sort of state. Sometimes, a lot of the times when I do these conversations, I don't mean for them to go sort of quite deep and philosophical. It's just that when I bring people onto the conversation, it naturally lends itself. But maybe it's also me curious to see how other people sort of do it. You mentioned you're an atheist, John Joe. I don't think it's a negative way. It's just how you sort of see things, right? So have you seen that proof, so to speak, you mentioned about seeing in a certain way? Or
I think what I meant by that is that my approach to learning and understanding is I try to find concrete evidence which can be not accessible if you're trying to reach things that are a little bit of a deeper level, whether it be spiritual or other, but that's how I've been able to find a little bit more access to being present by thinking about it from a scientific level, as to the future doesn't exist, the past doesn't exist as a concept. That's allowed me
it's very rational, isn't it?
Irrational, that's perhaps what I'm getting at. That rational approach has perhaps allowed me to get there a little bit, but I've also got a foot in reading a lot about Buddhism and the spiritual aspect of finding it that way. So I think there are various paths that people take, but everybody's trying to get to the same place ultimately.
It is interesting that we are trying to look for that sort of, I wouldn't say it's holy grail, but I think it's an answer that we all sort of want. And you mentioned, obviously, you now leading a business, it's giving you that flexibility whilst giving you more time to sort of self-develop. Do you find as a result of this business, you are allowed to self-reflect more in terms of where are you heading towards? Because I know you and we had a bit of a brief conversation before about the topic of self-reflection and how sometimes we do overthink it in a way. As a result of sort of going on your own, do you find you have more time to self-reflect, and it's more so a positive than a negative?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. Yeah, we're at a stage of our business which is a great time, and we're still quite small. We don't have the responsibility that comes with managing a large workforce, for instance. So yeah, I certainly have more time to reflect and think about ways that why are we doing this, what is the outcome that we're looking for, what's my own personal outcome. And so yeah, it's certainly given me a lot more time to be self-reflective, and that time perhaps is the reason why I do think about it a lot more now. Again, it's a luxury to have that time and the opportunity to think about enlightenment, right? Because if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's a luxury that we're at that stage where we can start to think about enlightenment, because we've got luxury, all those other things covered. Yeah, so I'm certainly acutely aware of that. And that's why I'm thinking about whether it's finding meaning through work, if that's the phrase, or that I'm certainly self-reflective about, if I've got this time, then what am I doing with it? And that's not a traditional thought would have been 5 years ago. What am I doing with it would be allocation of resources, which is still important now, but growth, as I mentioned, means something much different to what I'd have defined growth as a few years ago. And I suppose age comes with wisdom. In 10 years, I'll probably looking back at this and thinking that I was completely naive, but that's okay too.
It is okay. Hey, it is okay for the unknown. It is okay for definitions of growth and being your best self constantly changing. So would you say now in the present space, you put yourself in a good situation where you can grow, you can self-reflect, and you can really give yourself the time to think about what is the right move? Like from as you know, from the outside, it looks fine and dandy, right? But you don't really know someone until you have that conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. From my own perspective, yeah, I think it's really about juggling various different things and try to find balance. So, what does growth look like for my business? What does growth look like for my career? What is it like for being a dad, a partner? So how do I manage to, reach as close to max potential on all of those? And you can't have absolute max potential on one and expect to get it on all the other three. So that's been a correction for me more recently. So it's more about balance.
So came to you sort of recently about the fact that you can't have it all? Is that the right term? Or
unfortunately not. yeah, I think so. I mean, there hasn't been huge changes in the way I approach work. I still love working and I still get a lot out of work. So my intensity hasn't changed, but perhaps my long-term goal, perhaps you start to think, well, okay, great. I created this great business and we were really well revered, but I was an absent dad. I was a pretty poor partner. I think you've got to find some balance. And interestingly, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and that very point came up. World-class athlete was very genuine, saying that is the case, and they decided to pursue all their max potential into sport. And if they hadn't have been able to do so, that meant that they, had poor relationships with their family, and they were quite consciously aware of that. And if they hadn't have done that, they wouldn't have reached max output, which I thought was quite interesting. I'm not willing to do that because I'm not. So I think accepting that there's going to be some balance and some sacrifice somewhere is quite important.
And it's okay. Just getting back to that athlete, John Joe. So this person, he or she devoted all their time to their sporting career, and they were very upfront in mentioning that there were consequences with that choice.
And correct, yeah, and they wouldn't have done it another way, even though they had detrimental facts for their family. Yeah, so it's an extreme case. World-class sport is perhaps different to the commercial world, but it shows the two opposite ends. I think you perhaps want to find somewhere in the middle where personally, it's up to each individual, but find a place where you're at your best at each one, which is a perhaps new concept for me, to try balance, where instead of just being focused on one thing.
And you mentioned a young family, a young dad, and I'm pretty sure that's probably been a big catalyst for you.
You'd expect so, yeah, I think so, absolutely.
You might get something like this, a few minutes ago, of something walking around, and here I am trying to stay in the zone with you.
You're completely zen there, Jeff. You're a prime example of the meditation's working, and whatever you're doing. How's that been for you? We talked on briefly. So I don't know your story, but it sounds like you're working through a similar, perhaps not transition, but you're working through a similar outlook yourself.
Yeah, I think I'm happy to share. This is. I've done 23 episodes of this podcast, and it's probably come through in about maybe a few of them. But I had a kidney transplant back in 2010.
Right.
So, And that's forever changed me in terms of my outlook of how I think about the sort of things. And this morning, when I had a conversation with that Wall Street Journal bestseller, we talked about what it is that defines you in 3 words. And for me, it's a sense of humor, because I know when you get pushed to the edge and, you know, it's a sliding door moment as to whether you survive or you don't, you got to have a laugh. And I feel at ease because I've gone through so much, and that if it's not life threatening, I should be okay.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, wow. That's a really poignant perspective. How interesting is it that it takes us to get to that point, to achieve that, you know, the outlook, which perhaps everybody would be happy with if they were, you know, they did have that outlook, the same one as you, but we find it so hard to get there unless we're faced with mortality. And
It's actually a bit of an
I don't know
irony.
enough about the situation, but that is quite common, isn't it? When somebody's faced with mortality, that they perhaps see things clearer.
I suppose for me, and I suppose for some, you know, let's be honest, right? Like, I know for a fact that it was a sliding door moment. And I know that I would not be speaking to you right now if it weren't for that sliding door moment. So that very much, actually, when you think about it, it is very much a tool now. When you sort of ask me about how do I sort of stay in the present, that experience probably helps me. It definitely actually, you know what? It helps me, because it gives me that perspective that if it weren't for that sliding door moment, probably about 10 years ago, where I said to myself, I'll keep fighting or I give up. That's probably one of my defining moments. And that is carried with me for quite some time now. Well, it still does.
Is that something that you need to step into each day, or is it with you? Is that a constant for you from the moment you wake up?
I suppose I'm very lucky that since I've been doing this for 12 years, like, it's how long it's been now. This October will be my 12-year anniversary, or 12-year kidney anniversary, as to when I had that transplanted kidney, right? And since I've been doing it for such a long time, it's second nature to me now.
What second nature? How would you describe it?
In terms of, I just know that if I feel myself slipping, I can put myself back in.
What does slipping look like?
It's a switch. So, for example, I might feel very flustered and annoyed about something, for example, right? And I know when I reach a certain moment, I need to pull myself back. That pull myself back could mean a deep breath. Pull myself back could be looking at the scar I have on my abdomen, which shows where the transplanted kidney is. And that's a good reminder for me. And that allows me to pull myself back. But like what you said, sometimes there can be, I wouldn't say negative, but how should I put this? Too calm. You know what I mean? Sometimes when you play the game, you need to have that instinct, that killer instinct sometimes, right? But sometimes, since I'm so calm, right, it doesn't concern me at all.
Yeah. And that's a conscious thought of my own, to be honest. Yeah. And it's probably not a good one, but that is the truth. Yeah. I do worry that if I do become too calm, that I'll lose that edge. John Lennon said once, I step out as much as possible, but if I didn't have an ego, I wouldn't get anything done.
It's true.
So I do worry that, I'd lose that edge myself, but
I suppose it comes down to what you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure if you watched the Wimbledon finals, Nick Kyrgios and Novak Djokovic. No. Nick Kyrgios made a good point. He goes, if I had won Wimbledon, I would have been done with tennis, because I've hit the echelon in terms of tennis. And he goes, to be honest with you, if I won it, I wouldn't have been motivated to play again, in a way.
Do you find that a little bit sad?
In what way?
That, I mean, who am I to judge, but that his entire day to day is spent on an external goal that perhaps he's an extrinsic motivation based on other people's perceptions, that he's forcing himself to do it. He's not doing it because he wants to be a better player. I don't know. I'm making, absolute,
Yeah, no. It's
speculation here. But if you were doing something so much that as soon as you reached it, you were going to get out, then is that the right reason?
You know what's funny? If you were to ask me that before I had the kidney transplant, I said, yeah, you're banging the money. But then I realized it's not my life. It's your choice. If you want to go down that route where you want to work towards something that's very extrinsic in terms of a trophy and having your name on a plaque and, knock yourself out, whatever floats your boat, right?
Yeah.
Early on, right? I suppose, like I said, it comes from experience. Early on, I said, you know what? Why aren't people feeling sympathy for me? And then I realized everyone's got their own problem. And I was actually writing a book. I was actually planning to write a book, John Joe. And the title of it is Missing the Train is as bad as me getting kidney failure. That's the title of the book. Just to show you that we all have a problem, and your problem is your problem, right? It hurts. And it doesn't matter if someone's got cancer or whatever, right? It's not my problem, so it doesn't really concern me. Oh. Oh, good. You can hear me well, yeah, John Joe? Or...
Sorry, Jeff, just had a connection issue there.
Not a problem. You're back.
I've got you back. Sorry, yeah. You were saying each problem's...
Yeah, everyone's got their own problem. And what's interesting about this conversation is that we've really gone off topic in a way, haven't we?
Mm.
And that's what I want. There's no sort of set agenda. There's no really reason why. I'm just sort of curious to see how sort of people think in a certain way. But it's brilliant. Like, what I always find interesting is that I've learned so much about you in this conversation, and I do sort of think back. It would have been pretty cool if I had that when you and I first came to be in terms of our conversations.
Yeah, I agree, and it's I think what you're doing is really interesting, Jeff. And I think the reason I was excited to have the conversation is that I have a similar mindset in that each person you might meet on a day-to-day is actually really interesting, having a chat with them and understanding at the levels which you don't ever get to. You don't ever get it when you're speaking to somebody in the office or in a coffee shop or at a party or somebody meet, then you don't ever get to the deeper layers of what really makes them tick. So, people are actually really unique and really interesting once you get to understand them from a very deep level. So I think it's a great idea. And not to shamelessly plug my growing business, Jeff.
Permission granted.
That's the reason why we actually called the business Tenet. So Tenet, a belief or philosophy, and it was about meeting people and each experience you have with that person to really understand what they're about and what makes them tick, what their goals are, and then in some very small way being a part of that. So that's something I've been conscious of throughout. So it resonates what you're doing with me for sure.
What's interesting is that I suppose the idea came down in so many ways, and like any sort of idea, it sort of takes many influences, right? I suppose I was interested in doing something in terms of these conversations that go basically every day, right? And in a way, I was sort of just, how should I put it? A bit over those ones that sort of teach you, how do you sell better? How do you do this? They basically start with a how. And I didn't want to do something about that. I actually thought about doing one about selling, so to speak. And when you think about it, if you do selling, it's a niche. There's a defined target market. You can talk about many sort of things, right? But with the Medium podcast, nothing is off limits. So from a content creation point of view, it's endless. Because everyone that comes on the show is very unique.
You're right. And I also like the fact that you've been really open as to what that might look like for each person. It's not, it's not a case of like many self-help pieces of literature and content are about, this is the goal, and you're nowhere near that. So, you need to do this. And I don't think that's what this is. It could be, growth could be by any means, whatever your perception is. So I think it's great that you're quite open to that. And it's not about how do I become rich or how do I become, and that's fine.
Maybe I need to get more audience listeners. What do you think?
I get more listeners, but yeah. But yeah, I think it's great that you're open to whatever that looks like, and it's a little bit deeper, and it's not so superficial that a lot of content out there might be. Again, that's cool too, if that's what.
Hey, and you know what's cool about what you shared with me about the meaning of the business? That's fantastic. So tenant means, so what does that actually, so what if you were to define the word tenant, what does it actually mean? Sorry?
Definition means a belief or philosophy.
And obviously your belief and philosophy is to really know each one of your candidates. And obviously when you do, it's a win-win. It's a win-win for your candidate, and it's a win-win for your prospective partner that you work with. Yeah,
and added to that, the reason is to that self-reflection. So why did we start this business? What are we doing? And perhaps to constantly remind ourselves of why we did it. Yeah, so it's multifaceted, and it changes all the time. But yeah, it was we thought it'd be something that would be as relevant to us now as it might be in a decade's time.
Definitely. And I believe you have a business partner, is that correct? Or
That's right. With you? Yeah. So we've known each other for a few years now. So there's two of us and a couple of people. Sorry, Jeff. Yeah, and a couple of people supporting as well. So yeah, so we're 10 months in now.
Wow. And a bit of hiring on your own, or are you going to keep it amongst yourselves? Oh, sorry, John. I just lost you there. Feel free to use the mic on your MacBook or your PC. Just change the audio. And to the audience out there, as much as I love things to work according to plan, these things happen. Coffee on me if you actually pick this up.
Got it, Jeff.
Brilliant. So I was actually talking to myself, and I said, as much as I love for things to work seamlessly, things don't. So if someone were to go into this conversation and get to about the 1 hour mark, we've been talking about 1 hour, by the way. I said to that person that if you were to pick up this silent spot, I was going to buy you a coffee. So let's see how many coffees I need to expend.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned a business partner. You guys are very much you've been together for 10 months. Are you yourselves looking to hire as well, or?
We will. Yeah, I think over the course of this year, we're at a stage where we're perhaps quite enjoying being so hands-on with customers ourselves at the moment. But yeah, perhaps the evolution of the business will be to have a couple of people to come in and join us, another two at some point this year. But we're still working out, why would somebody want to come work for us? We want to be really watertight on providing something that's really compelling for somebody that's going to come join us, not just see what we can get out of somebody coming to work for us. Why would somebody want to come here? What can they gain? And we're still at a stage where we're quite early on, and it's perhaps not quite the right time, though we could. In the next quarter, we'll probably look at it. But I think it's really important to understand what we can offer first, and we want to do that really well.
Have you thought about that? That's a very interesting sort of perspective about what you can offer people, not not what they can give you. That's a great way. That's great thinking.
The reason being, yes, obviously we were able to gain certain things from the business, which are flexibility, high performance, and customer time, which, you know, those responsibilities will change with having other people join us. So we want to make sure that we can offer something that's compelling and aligns with what people want first, I think.
I think your philosophy, I'll join you because that philosophy is fantastic, right? Like, I think you really sold me on that.
Anytime, Jeff.
But you know, but then you got to give me foosball table and pre-lunches and all that sort of thing.
So I'll do it. Sounds good. As long as we get some access on there on the podcast.
And you know, we're sort of approaching an hour mark. I'm sort of conscious of your time as well. Let's strip away everything. Let's peel everything away. Let's just show who we are. Like I said, hopefully it's been a conversation for you where you don't even know it's being recorded. And that's basically the experience that I want to achieve for my guests. And for my listeners, it's the beauty of listening to someone where it's actually that person. I always like asking this question because it gives me a glimpse as to what's important at the end of the day for you, right? So if I ask you to paint me a picture, or where do you physically see yourself in 30 years' time, what would that be?
Oh, wow.
Physically, where you are.
Physically?
Physically.
As in location, so I'll be in Melbourne.
You could be you could be in the Bahamas sipping a pina colada, and thinking about, you know, retiring. It could be anything.
Yeah,
you tell me.
Got it. Yeah, got it. I'd be in Melbourne. Absolutely love Melbourne. So I'd be in Melbourne in a house that I've lived in for a number of years and owned, and I'd be sitting in a garden, and there'd be you know, big garden with plenty of things that have been grown there, and I'd be probably out there just spending time.
Tell me what's growing. What's growing?
I'm certainly not well enough into it just yet, but I think there'd be some fruit and veg that'd be growing. There'd be certain plants which I'm hoping I'd probably get into in older age, and I'd be sat out in the garden. I think just being present, Jeff, just chasing where you are. I think that's probably it for me. And I think there'd be, you know, kids will be there, family will be there.
Yep.
Perhaps sat outside having lunch together or something like that. But I think just something as small and simple as that is where I will be, in the hope that I'll be present.
Fantastic. John Joe, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast with me. Thank you for welcoming my son. He's the first time he's appeared. I knew it was going to happen one day. You're just lucky enough to feel his wrath as he rattles around everywhere.
No, I think he's got a great podcasting career ahead of him. So it's good job. Have you both on.
Fantastic.
Nice one, Jeff. Thanks again.
My pleasure.